or they want to practice their English with you, so your Russian skills are going downhill accordingly. So, be very conscientious sometimes of what level of language you may acquire just because you're physically living in one location. I know we're running a little short of time, so I'm going to skim through some of this stuff. Just because you speak a language and you want to live somewhere doesn't mean you can. Welcome to the world. Every single summer, I used to get a phone call, and I hate to stereotype, but I will. It would always be one of my American students from an airport in some location at customs saying, they're sending me back, what do I do? And they were heading off for their internship. And I'll go, oh, what was in your luggage? I don't want to know this. They go, no, I don't have a visa. Well, why don't you have a visa? I'm an American. I can go, oh, no. Well, you know what? Guess what? I hope you got an open credit card, because that flight's going to cost you about $2,000 to come back from wherever you are, and you have to pay it. And if you're really lucky, you're not going to have some sort of record in that country, so you can't go back there again, because they could put a stamp in your visa and you can't return. So the moral of this little story is just because you want to work somewhere doesn't mean you can. Yes, a lot of you backpacked through Europe at some point, you got sort of short-time, temporary jobs. Trust me, most of that was under the table, and no one filed income tax, and no one ever was the wiser for it. Be very aware of what the legal rules are for where you can work. The UN is a great example. Just because you want to work there doesn't mean you can get hired, because a lot of the full-time permanent hire, it's different for contracting, is based on citizenship eligibility, and that is reviewed every single year. State Department has great opportunities, but it's not the kind of job the day you graduate, you say, okay, and next month I want to start as a Foreign Service Officer. It's a 4 to 7 year process to pass a whole bunch of exams, and most people, and nothing personal, are going to fail the first couple times. The exams are designed to fail you. So it's going to be a matter of who continues to do the process long enough so that you pass all the exams. So just think about this ahead of time. All right. There's different examples, again, of positions. Private sector, foundations, women's empowerment organizations, Peace Corps. We had someone here who did Peace Corps. UNEP GRID is a little agency of the United Nations Environmental Program in Norway. It handles all the technology services for the United Nations Environmental Program. All sorts of different groups. This is what policy is. So some of these things are pretty obvious, but the Development Office Director of Major Gifts at Yale, that's education management or education administration. It's policy work. Okay, language-based careers. Again, same types of areas we've covered before here. Skills, language abilities, education, they all cover it. So a couple different ways to look at this. Again, depending on what you're going to be doing, if it's in the teaching field. In a lot of countries, if you're interested in teaching English, and a lot of undergrads, if they're getting an opportunity to go live in another country for the first time, a lot of people may choose to do some English instruction. Great, go off and do it. You're going to decide one of two things pretty quickly. I love teaching, and I want to continue in the teaching field. And this may allow for wonderful opportunities to work in the international schools, or to teach languages in other locations to non-native speakers of English, or I'm going to go off and teach science because I just love teaching, and I'm going to go back to school and become a science teacher. Or you're going to say, wow, children, all day, really? I don't think so. Maybe my neighbor's kids, but 2 hours and they're going to pay me, or something like that. So it's important, again, to learn a little bit about what you can do. You may decide you love education, this was my case, but you sure don't like little kids that much. They're wonderful, but not in an enclosed setting unless, not for me, thank you. But, again, what can you teach? Are you the kind of person that wants to educate adults? Are you the kind of individual that wants to provide information or services? The career staff here, they are educators. They educate individuals about professional development, professional needs. So they are teachers in a way, but they're not sitting at the chalkboard writing out, formula and stuff like that. They could probably do that for you. But these different kinds of organizations are great opportunities for you, and a lot of them, because we have a big group of Spanish speakers here in the room, have opportunities, particularly World Teach, for example, to get a chance to do some short-term teaching. Some of these programs are 6 months long, most of them are maybe a year, but it gives you a chance to sort of test the water a little bit, live in another environment, explore this particular field, see if it's for you. Okay. As I said, you may decide this is what you want to do when you take Path A. If it's not a TESOL degree, it could be a Master's in Education, it could be a Bachelor's in Education. It depends on what the teaching credentials and the location you're going to be in require of you. Or you may say, yeah, maybe not so much, but it was a good experience. What's that extra thing I want to do? Here's the change that's happened in the last 7 or 8 years. You really are starting to have a more advanced education, or at least teaching credentials in the United States, if you want to have a quality teaching position outside of the U.S., at least in English teaching. If you're going to be a math instructor at an international school in Dubai, you still have to have math teaching credentials. That's a given. But the whole idea of, when I went to Japan when I was 21 in 1990, I couldn't teach you how to jump 2 feet. I mean, I knew nothing about teaching, which was good in some ways because I didn't know when I was screwing up. My friends that were teachers, trained professionals, would be pulling out their hair every day saying, but we're not following the design curriculum, we're not having learning implementation tools. And I was like, I got them to say the right word today. Yay! You know, that was a major accomplishment. So sometimes what you don't know can also be helpful for you. But that is really changing. If you want to get better positions with better salary and different opportunities for yourself, usually having more credentialing and more service is required. But that doesn't mean that because you have an education teaching background that you're necessarily going to be in front of a class of individuals. These are all different positions in the education field. Editing, teacher training, technology specialists, content development, curriculum design. Those are all teaching fields or education fields, but they're not the traditional teacher as we think about it. Okay? Test developers, huge area now. The Defense Language Institute has 2 locations in the U.S. and in Monterey. They'll take their instructors, who are all native speakers for the most part, they'll pull them out for 3 years to develop a 40 or 50 question language test. Why does it take 3 years to develop a 50 question language test? I don't know, this is the same type of group that pays $800 for a hammer. I don't know. But it does take an enormous amount of work to define very specialized curriculum developed testing. So it's a lot of work, a lot of interest areas. Okay, TNI. Every time someone says, I hired a translator to help me talk to the people, I go like this, because that wasn't a translator, that was an interpreter. Interpreters communicate information and knowledge. Translators take the written word and translate that from one language to another. Okay? Did anyone see the movie The Interpreter with Nicole Kidman? Yeah, totally erroneous. I mean, other than the fact that the interpretation booths at the UN Secretariat were actually used for the filming, the rest of it, I mean, our whole interpretation department was just, yeah, you remember this, don't you? We're just in an uproar. I mean, it was just horrible. Whatever. All right, but again, when you think of yourself as working, and someone here in the background, in the back area, had some questions about being an interpreter or a translator, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be dealing with words or language every single day, because there's a lot of other positions. One of the biggest areas for translators right now is project management. So as you go on, yes, some people are nodding their heads here. The majority of our Korean, Japanese, and Chinese students right now in our translation and interpretation program are hired by Silicon Valley major tech firms to work as project managers in localization software management, taking the different software tools and not just translating the materials, but actually making it culturally appropriate. And this is where marketing, someone talked about marketing in some of these areas. I don't want to be a marketer necessarily. There's a famous marketing story about Pampers. When they took Pampers to South Africa, apparently in Ndebele, one of the languages in South Africa, when you see something on the box, that's what's inside the box. So when Pampers showed up and they had little babies on the box, there was a public outcry that, you know, small children were being shipped from the United States in these boxes, and this was horrible. I mean, this was decades ago. Things have changed, but you know, so you have to think culturally about what you're translating, and is it relevant to that audience? Does it make sense? It's not just taking the word and saying, okay, the word for this in English and the word for this in Japanese, and now it makes sense. It has to be in the context of the other field.
So I don't have a question. I just wanted to add something. Besides the resources that Leah put together on the handouts for you, there are some tremendous resources on the Career Services website that you can access through the Middlebury website. There's a series of guides called the Going Global Guides for about 30 different countries. It will tell you what the employment laws are in that country. There are also by country job hunting tips, resources, you know, things like that for the countries that are listed.
You can read this. My email is all lowercase letters, lgowron@miis.edu. I've got business cards here too if you want, if that's easier. If you want to find the different resources, let me see if I can do this really fast for you guys. On the Monterey site, because I say this is open domain information, anybody can use it. Let me see if I actually know how to do it. Thank you. Okay. How many years have I worked for? I cannot see on the screen.